Today I will be dealing with the various areas of the brain and their functions. Picture here I have given the Dr. Roger Sperry, who won a Nobel Prize for the split brain functions, because in 1981 he got this Nobel Prize. It was the work done earlier than 1981, and he showed that the two in the patients who have undergone the separation of the two brains because of the epilepsy or some other reason, and he's shown that there are differences in their functionality of the two cerebral hemispheres. Okay, just giving that brief idea. This is Roger Sperry, a psychologist from America. Okay, in the last class, what we did, we mapped the entire cerebral cortex according to the cytoarchitecture. That means we have mapped the brain in three major areas. One which part is having 6 layers, what is called a isocortex. One which is having 3 layers is a allocortex, and one which is having in between 3 and 6, that is the mesocortex. So the isocortex represents the 90% of the total cortical area. The allocortex represents only 5 to 10% of the total cortical area. That is restricted to the hippocampus, the uncus, and other parts. Now, coming back here, so that is one aspect of the histological mapping according to the cells. And there our aim was to study where the relay is taking place, where the cells are relayed, and which part of the cerebral cortex, especially the gray matter of the cerebral cortex, does what. If you are thinking about layer 1, that is arousal. Layer 2, it is a sort of a associative. Then layer 3 is a commissural type. Layer 4 is sensory. Layer 5 is motor. Layer 6 is thalamic. I repeat, layer 1, outer molecular layer. This is arousal, generalized arousal response. Layer 2 is associative. That means it spreads the impulses along the different areas within the same cortex, associative. It's not restrictive, but mostly associative. Layer 3 is associative as well as commissural. Commissural means between the two hemispheres. Layer 4 is a granular layer. This granular layer, so layer 2 is a outer granular layer. Layer 3 is a outer pyramidal cell layer. Layer 4 is a inner granular layer. This is the major cell line. And then layer 5 is a giant pyramidal cell layer or inner pyramidal cell layer. And layer 6 is a fusiform layer. So layer 4 is sensory. It receives all sensory modalities or inputs into this layer 4 granular cells. Layer 5 gives the information to the brainstem and spinal cord. These are motor fibers. The corticospinal or corticobulbar fibers originate from this, and even cortico-reticular fibers. And the one communications to the basal ganglia and the cerebellum also goes from here. Then layer 6 is a fusiform layer. This fusiform layer, it communicates or it gives information to the thalamus. That means within the brain and the midbrain structures it tries to organize. So that is about the organizational aspect of the brain in terms of the histological perspective. Now today what we see what are the various areas of the brain, because we often come across these areas as we discussed in the nervous system. Now here I have made 4 colors. of the cerebral hemisphere. This is a cerebral hemispheres. You see these four colors: the blue, yellow, the green, and the pink. So the blue one is the frontal cortex. This is a frontal cortex. This area, this is the anterior, this is central sulcus. This is central sulcus. This black area, this central sulcus, and this is the lateral sulcus. The area in front of the central sulcus and the lateral sulcus is the frontal area. This is the frontal cortex or frontal area. And again, it is divided into the prefrontal cortex. This is the prefrontal cortex, and this is the frontal motor area. So this, what I am trying to say, that this is frontal motor area. And here, posterior to the central sulcus, this is central sulcus. The posterior to the central sulcus, and this is a calcarine sulcus. Calcarine sulcus that separates the occipital lobe from the parietal lobe. This is a calcarine sulcus. And this is a continuation. The dashed line is a continuation of these lateral sulcus. You just see that lateral sulcus, dot, 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 dot. This area, the yellow area, is the parietal cortex. Now, the area here, this is the temporal cortex. This is temporal cortex, the greenish area, that is the just inferior to the central sulcus, lateral sulcus, and then this is a dotted line. Okay, and the calcarine, that is the occipital, separating the occipital cortex. These are the four areas. Maybe you can just see this is parietal, yellowish. This is occipital, the pink one. Then this is temporal area of the cerebrum. Well, now we know the areas. These are the four areas. Broadly, these are four areas, and we have many more areas. Maybe as we come across, we can unfold them one after another. This part is the cerebellum. This is the medulla and the pontine region. So that we will not, only we are focusing on the cerebrum. Now we move on. What are the functions of the frontal lobe? Because after having been discussed about the four lobes, frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital, I want to give a brief idea about the functionality of each lobes, because you may be inquisitive or you may be interested to know what they do, what are the broad functions. I will deal with them in a greater detail as I take up this particular segments of the nervous system. Till then, we should have a broad outline of the functions of each of these cortex. This frontal cortex or the frontal lobe is for the decision making. All the decisions we make in our life, it is coming from the frontal lobe. Whether to attend the class or not to attend the class, what are the benefits of attending a class, or what are the benefits of doing a particular job, this decision making. So that is the frontal lobe. Then executive functions. Executives like planning, programming, and organizing, and making a judgment on a particular thing. All these executive functions. Particular thing means anything in our life, day-to-day activity. Whether I want to take a food or not is also one of the component of our daily living. So that particular judgment or particular executive function, how if I want to go for a food, how I will go, and what are the things, and entire thing is decided by the frontal lobe. These are executive functions. Then this is the one which controls our impulsive activity or emotional activity. That is where we differ from the rest of the animals of the animal kingdom, that the impulsive activity or emotional activities are suppressed by the frontal cortex. That means this is because of the decision making and judgment. So they will say that they are suppressed so that you don't want to behave in a particular way. So that is the control of the impulsive and emotional activity. And it stores the working memory. It stores some part of it. The major part of the memory is with the hippocampus and the respective association areas. But it stores the working memory. Working memory is a short-lived memory. Just for example, if I want to say what is working memory, suppose if I give you a telephone number 568-748, these 6 numbers I gave, and if I ask you to repeat, you will repeat. So just for a short period of time, it is withheld. So that is withheld here in the frontal cortex. Then it has the social functions. That means what dress I want to wear, how I want to look like, and what are the things for the dressing up pattern for the classes, for the party, for the marriage. These are some social functions. So all these socialization, that means this is one aspect, that is only the pattern, or social behaviors, how I want to behave with my friend, my father, my parents, my seniors. These are social functions. All these social functions come from the frontal lobe. In addition, the frontal lobe, this area, what a particular area I am talking about, anterior to the central sulcus and up to this point, this area is a supplementary motor area and the motor area. This is a motor area and this is supplementary motor area. And this is performing the motor functions. In addition to these motor areas, the frontal area, prefrontal area, gives the ideation and a thought for an action. Suppose if I want to do a certain action, so the ideation is generated here in the frontal lobe in association with the other 3 areas of the cerebrum. So that means the thought and ideation is generated by the prefrontal cortex. And here is the place, this place here, this is the Broca's area. So that is a production of the speech, the motor area for the speech. Speech is produced here in the frontal. So now these are the functions. I just repeat: decision making, executive functions, judgment, the control of impulsive and emotional activity, the working memory, the social behavior and social functions, the motor functions, the generation of the thought and ideation for the motor actions, and the speech, the motor component. That is about the frontal lobe. Now, moving on to the parietal lobe. Parietal lobe is not as complicated or as that of the frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is highly evolved. If you are thinking about the evolutionary scale, the frontal lobe, the size of the frontal lobe has increased with a degree of the evolution. That means the Homo sapiens, and if you are looking at the apes, the frontal lobe area is lesser in apes than the Homo sapiens, that is the human beings. Now, the parietal lobe, this is the parietal lobe, this is sensory area, this is sensory part that receives the sensory components, especially the somatosensory components. So that means it receives sensory control. And part of it is also governs the motor activity. So I'm telling the 40% of the corticospinal tracts originate from this somatosensory area. So that means they also contribute for the motor or the motor activity. And here in this area, there is the receival of the information, receival of the sensory information, the decoding of the sensory information, and then after decoding, the translation of the sensory information, and then trying to bring about the various attributes of the sensory information. So that all is done in the parietal cortex. Of course, they cannot do it by alone. That is in association with this, and this. That is in association with the occipital, visual, in association with the temporal, auditory, and the limbic is the emotional components. That is how the sensory component is processed. So then we have the tactile discrimination by this lobe, stereognosis by this lobe. Then in the sensory association area, this is the sensory association area here. It takes help of the visual, temporal, and the limbic association areas. And the sensory association area hosts the or holds the sensory memory. So for any object, say for example, if I have the whatever the object here, this is the headphone. This headphone, regarding all the information regarding this headphone, is stored in the sensory association area. I will know that here is a mic, here are the ear things, and so on. Here is a band. So all those that information, though it is pressing, it is ignoring. So that type of a particular component of a sensation, anything about the somatic sensation will be stored here in the sensory this thing. That means any attributes. Say for example, if I have a 5 rupee coin, all the attributes related to the 5 rupee coin, how the serrations are there, what is the weightage, how it looks, and how it feels. All those aspects are there stored in the memory of the sensory association area, so that we can retrieve it back. Then comes the occipital lobe. Occipital lobe is highly evolved sensory area. Highly evolved sensory area. Here, this is for the vision. This is for all our visual activity. So that means the visual, that means even visual acuity, visual discrimination, and the color sensing. The color sensing is the most complex of the visual activity. Color sensing, the angles, the imaging, the object, then shading, and all the three-dimensional features of the entire visual activity. So that is stored here in occipital. This part is the tip of this thing is area 17. That is the primary visual area. The second component here is the secondary visual area known as V2. So this will do the vision, imagery, visual perception, and visual memory. As here it is done with the somatosensory area, the sensory memory, here it keeps the visual memory. That means you have seen a particular object, that imagery of that particular object is stored here. Then comes the temporal lobe. This is the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe hosts two or more important structures. One, it holds the sensory component of the language or speech. Wernicke's area, this somewhere here is the Wernicke's area. And it holds an important sensory modality, that is the auditory area, hearing. Hearing is coming here, the auditory area. And it holds the entire the group of nuclei of the limbic system that will be governing the emotion, the sexuality, then the memory. Emotion, the sexuality, and the memory, they are part of the temporal lobe. So that means temporal lobe syndrome is one of the things which is known. So that may affect all these things. That means the particular, if you ablate this thing, the particular animal changes its sexuality, it becomes hypersexual and hyper emotional, and the memory is lost. So in Alzheimer's disease, some of the neurons in this temporal lobe are lost. That is the circle of Maynard is there in the temporal lobe, and they are lost. These are cholinergic neurons that would be losing the memory. That means no memory is being formed. So okay, so that means temporal lobe is important with the limbic system, auditory system, and the language. Three components. The language, limbic system governs the emotion, memory, sexuality, and the language is the Wernicke's area, and the hearing is the auditory area. Now we move on. What are association areas of the brain? I have, up till now, what I have done the broad outline of what looks like, what is this thing. Now these areas have association areas. So that means what are those association areas? So these are the areas of the brain that link different parts of the brain structures for proper executing functions. Okay, so now these association areas in which there is a storage of information, There is, it will define all the attributes or all the characteristics or the properties of a particular sensory or a motor or any type of a modality. So that will be processed. That is association. Now we have, I have just listed here four major type of association area: parietal, occipital, temporal association area. So now if I were to come parietal, occipital, temporal association area, this would be coming something like this. I'd show about that. The parietal, occipital, temporal association area. That's one. Then in the parietal, occipital, temporal association area, what happens? You have the parietal association area. This is the somatosensory association area, area 5 and 7 here. Then you have the occipital association area, area 18 or V2, what is called the visual association area. So then we have here the auditory, secondary auditory area, auditory association area, somewhere here. That is the auditory association area. That is what I have depicted: sensory, visual, and auditory. Then we have a motor association area. Where is the motor association area? So this is the motor cortex, I said. This is the motor cortex, and this is supplementary motor area. And this forms the motor association area. The limbic association area and the prefrontal association area. So we have four association areas, but in the first one, I have divided, that means each one of them have been given an attribute: sensory, visual, and auditory. The motor, the limbic, prefrontal again communicates with almost all the areas. Now coming back here, here is the parietal, occipital, temporal association area. This is the parietal, occipital, temporal association area. You can just see that. So now here is the secondary somatosensory area. This is communicating with the parietal occipital. This forms the parietal occipital here itself. That's one component. Then visual association area, this will be joining with the visual. So that means it will take the information from the visual association area. This gets information here, this gets information here. Auditory, this is auditory, this is auditory. This will be talking to these things. All three modalities, 1, 2, 3 things, all things are clubbed together in this parietal occipital association area. Here in this association area, we have the speech area, the sensory speech area, what is called a Wernicke's area, somewhere here. So this is a primary auditory area. You just see that this is a primary auditory area. This is the sensory area. This is central sulcus, and this is motor area. And this component, this yellow thing, or slightly pale yellow thing, this is supplementary premotor area. This is a motor association area. So then this forms the prefrontal association area. This one entire thing is a prefrontal association area, and this is a limbic association area. So that means I have this is a primary motor cortex. This is secondary M2. And then supplementary motor area, a premotor area and supplementary motor area. Then prefrontal area. Here is the speech center, especially the motor speech center, what is called a Broca's. How does the limbic association area looks like? Because it's not very clear. So to visualize the limbic association area, we have to take the societal section of the brain. So that means you separate out the two hemispheres by dividing them in the midline. When you divide them in the midline, you have the structures like this. So this forms the corpus callosum. This is the corpus callosum. This is the one which attaches the both the hemispheres. Okay. So over the corpus callosum, you have this C type, the greenish C type. This is the cingulate cortex. This is one of those areas. This is cingulate gyrus. This is one of those areas part of the limbic system. This is concerned with the emotional, and it receives inputs from the amygdala. And it also communicates with the prefrontal cortex. You can just see that it has a very extensive area. So from the entire cerebral cortex, it talks to the prefrontal cortex, it talks to the motor area, it talks to the sensory area, it talks to the visual area, and it also talks to the auditory. So that means it is trying to understand each of those components in terms of the emotion and emotional responses. So like that, that is the meaning of that. This is cingulate cortex. And here the violet one, or the bluish violet one, it is the hippocampus and the dentate gyrus. This is the hippocampus making it as a dentate gyrus. So this is hippocampus. And see, it is going on tail-like thing. It's coming up here. So this is hippocampus. And the tip of this is this one is an amygdala. Amygdala is an emotional area in which all the emotions are positive emotions or negative emotions. That means happiness or aggressiveness, or negative emotions, the angry or aggressiveness, or joy and other aspects, happiness or the positive emotions, all are vested here in the amygdala. So that means the limbic system consists of the amygdala, the hippocampus, the cingulate gyrus, and all the areas connected with this, and some part of the olfactory system. And this is what the limbic system is. So we see only part of this in the temporal cortex, part of it, the most of it is interior. So that is why when we make the sagittal section, we see that. Now, you just see that the same thing I have just made, the limbic area. So same, this gray area is the cingulate cortex. The yellow area is the hippocampus, hippocampal area and hippocampal outputs. And this one is an amygdala, and this is a parahippocampal area. And you have this is coming here, olfactory area. And so all these things are put together as a limbic area. And this limbic area performs, that means the connectivity of the limbic area is to the entire cortical mantle. I will say that the cortical mantle. So I have mentioned this is visual occipital area, this is vision. So now here the association area of the visual, this processes the visual thing into words. So if I see some letters, I will just read them and I give a meaning to that visual processing. So then if I see a particular object, say for example, I am showing you the cup. Now this is the object I recognize. I name this object as a cup. So like that, that is visual imagery. That's in visual imagery. That's giving up. So now here is the somatosensory association area, this one, somatosensory association area. It will give all the attributes about the sensory components, the spatial coordinates of the body and its surroundings, including the visual and auditory inputs. So this is one. And this area, the blue area here, it is the, I said, the sensory area for the language. That is the language, comprehension, intelligence, and the speech. The speech, Wernicke's area. This is a Wernicke's area. That will give you the language, the comprehension, and the intelligence. This is Wernicke's area. And this is somatosensory association area, where we mentioned about an area 312. This is area 312 here. So then this is the auditory area, the primary auditory area and the secondary auditory area. So now here, this forms the limbic association area I mentioned. This is behavior, emotions, and motivation. Now to come here, this is extending from the prefrontal area to the temporal area. This is the temporal component. Now in the prefrontal cortex, we have this prefrontal cortex, the planning, judgment, executive functions, social behavior, and bringing up thoughts, and all those things are coming here in this prefrontal area. And this one is the area in which we produce words. Whatever I am speaking, my speech is coming from the activity generated in this area. This is known as a Broca's area. Broca's area, this one. This area, it produces the speech, and whatever I am making out. See, when I am making out, I am moving the limbs. Now this speech area tells the motor area it coordinate or synchronizes the actions of the limbs. So that is the motor area. This is the motor area here. This is a primary motor area, and this is a supplementary motor area. Supplementary motor area and the motor association area. And this is limbic association area I have already shown. So these are the various areas of the brain and their broad functionality. Because when I am trying to talk, I will deal each one of them maybe in a detailed manner. When we reach to a particular, if I am taking up the limbic system, I will take in a little more detailed manner in which we can understand each of those limbic functions. Two hemispheres, one hemisphere and another hemisphere, left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. And is the processing is similar in both the hemispheres? That is the first question. That is what the Sperry did, and which won him the Nobel Prize. He said that left does a different function and right does a different function. Right hemisphere, different functions, left hemisphere, different functions. So that means the left and right, they divide their functions. There is a division of labor between the hemispheres. They will say that I will do this and you will do this, because even though the nerves reach to the particular areas in the brain or in the hemisphere, their perspective is different. Let us see what is that. So usually in a right-handed person, as the fibers cross, the left hemisphere becomes a dominant hemisphere. This is called a dominant hemisphere, the left one, because in a right-handed person, mostly 90% of the cases. In 10% of the cases, though right hand, if he may have the right side as a dominant hemisphere, that is a different aspect. This hemisphere, the left hemisphere, this is a dominant hemisphere. It is also known as a categorical hemisphere. Categorical hemisphere. So that it gives all the categories for this. Or also it is known as a major hemisphere. The major, dominant, or categorical. The right one is a minor, representational, or non-dominant hemisphere. So these are the things. Now you may be wondering why there is a division of labor, and what is the division of the labor between the right and the left hemisphere. If you are looking at that, so this is the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. I have this has been separated, and these two are interconnected here. This is a corpus callosum. This is corpus callosum. Left and right hemispheres communicate via so that means they talk to each other. So that is what I called a commissural fibers. The commissural fibers are coming from the layer 2 and 3 and some part layer 6 of the cerebral cortex. The layer 6 is a fusiform layer. Layer 2 is the inner outer granular layer. Layer 3 is the outer pyramidal layer. They receive the commissural inputs. The commissural inputs, they pass through these corpus callosum. That means both of them, whatever happens here, it shares the information to the right. Whatever happens in the right, it shares the information to the left. There is a total coordination of whatever. Okay, so that is one aspect. So then what the left does? So if you are looking at the left, this is the area, Broca's area. This is Broca's area. So that means this would be speech. That is for the control of speech. So left is the dominant hemisphere, and it controls the speech. It controls the language. Language in the sense how I am using the depth and the severity of the language. I may use the same word in a different tones. Each of the tone have a meaning in terms of the emotions. And this left side is the mathematical brain, where we calculate these 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. This mathematical function, it is performed by the left hemisphere. It is a precise, it makes the precise activity, precise decisions, precise formats, so that it has a precision. And it is analytical and it is scientific. It tries to have the logic, it takes the logic and it tries to analyze in a scientific manner and scientific these things, and it will try to provide you this thing. And it is exactly similar. If I say particular words, they are taken in the particular word pattern only. And here it will receive the words as a sound, not as a musical notes. So that is the left hemisphere. Left hemisphere, it controls the speech, it controls the language, it has a mathematical functions, it has a precision, it is scientific, it is analytical, it is literal, and it recognizes the sounds. About the right hemisphere. Right hemisphere, it is more philosophical. Right hemisphere, I can say it is philosophical. So the left hemisphere is just scientific. This is more philosophical. It insight into this thing, and it is mostly visual, and it is musical. Visual in the sense creating painting. The person makes the painting, and these painters are gifted with these things in which they have those right hemisphere is highly evolved. It's musical. So that means all the musical creators have a greater dominance of the right hemisphere. It's musical. So that means here it has both the side you will receive the sound. Both the side have the auditory cortex. Both the sides they have a sound. But one side, left side, it is recognized as a sound. In the other side, it gives the musical component or perspective of that particular sound. It's musical. And regarding other sensory modalities, that is a three-dimensional structure and a spatial orientation and all those configurations, three-dimensional configurations are provided here on the right side. And it is for the skills, it is for the intuition, it is for the creation, and it is for the artistic components. So that means, look, if you are looking at that, one left hemisphere is a simple, straightforward, if I were to say that, simple, straightforward, scientific and logical. Right hemisphere is philosophical, and it's creative, it is artistic, it is having intuition, and it is musical. So you can have what I have written here, 2 plus 2 is greater than 4. That means it imagines more than 4. Here it is a precise, exactly 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Okay, this is a brief idea about the left and the right hemispheres. So one is a dominant hemisphere. This is a dominant hemisphere, and this is the non-dominant or a representative or a minor hemisphere. But both are. This is more important for our learning. This is philosophical, the total comprehension. So that means this one is also important. This is also important. Both of them together, they work, and the whole thing develops. Okay. So now you try to discover yourself. You can have your reflections written up, and every one of us are gifted with something. And if we can analyze ourselves, whether I am having a left hemisphere dominance or a right hemisphere dominance, whether I am more mathematical or whether I am more artistic. If I am more artistic, my right hemisphere is dominant. So the orators, great orators, the skills, or great painters, great musicians, they have those right hemisphere in their top. So whereas the scientists, the great scientists, and the great interpreters, and the great mathematicians, and those who have a precision, So this is the left. So you can try to have, and we all human beings have a combination of these things in permutations. We have this left right cerebral functions. Now I have just trying to summarize this hemispheres, two hemispheres here. Here is a picture. It was perhaps taken from the Sperry's articles or Sperry's these things. You just see that here a person is writing the on the paper. So they with a pencil and a hand, and usually when we write, we keep other hand on the paper, because we studied this thing. And if you just see that visual, when you talk about the visual system, how this thing, so there will be a crossing the right side and the left side, and you can see that in the first we will say the left hemisphere. This is the left hemisphere. Okay, so now this is the major hemisphere. So now what is happening? This image is formed here. The writing, the speech. It has a great speech center, and the speech is dominant here. This is writing. Writing is dominant here. The speech may be verbal, speech may be graphical. Graphical is writing. Both are dominant here. So on the right side, on the left side. Okay. Then another part. This is ear here. So what's written here? Hello. Hello means a sound. It will detect only the words. It will detect the words. Hello, how are you? What are you doing? And all those words, that is what they do not have this thing. If you are looking at the same component here, the musical note has been given. They are looking at the musical component of that sound. So now here on this side, on the dominant hemisphere, there is a language center. That means it is for the language, speech, writing, the sound, the language center, and then precision and calculation. And all these things in a logical manner. The entire thing going in a logical manner. So that means this is what about the left hemisphere or a dominant hemisphere. Then what is happening here in the minor hemisphere or a representational hemisphere? What I have mentioned here: language, speech, math skills, problem solving, sign language. So whatever sign language, and sound, detection of the sound or words or whatever. So in the dominant hemisphere, it's creative. It creates, and it is imaginative. It tries to imagine things, and it is artistic. It is philosophical. It is musical. It has a poetical components, because most of these poetry or the poets, they are philosophers, and they are imaginative, they are artistic, and it is emotional, because even if you take as a poetry, any poetry, there is an emotional component associated, and they detect the spatial relationship. This is what the spatial relationship I am trying to look at. So that means it will detect the imaginative aspect, and the musical aspect, the spatial aspect, the language, simple language, and other emotional and creative components of the minor hemisphere. I don't know whether it is whether the word minor is a good word or not, but it is being used as a minor hemisphere. This is the major hemisphere, and when you separate out, that is the patients who are having epilepsy, who underwent the corpus callosum sectioning, and he studied, the Sperry studied in these patients and tried to analyze how these persons behave, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, and that won him the Nobel Prize. Okay, now the summary of the other areas of the brain, I will just outline: the frontal area, the temporal area, the parietal area behind the sulcus, the parietal area, occipital area. So this is a prefrontal association area. This is the supplementary motor area or motor association area, and this is a primary motor area that is in front of the central sulcus. This is a primary somatic area, S1 we talked about. This is S2, and we have this auditory area. This is the auditory area, primary auditory area. This is the auditory association area. This is the Parietal, Occipital, Temporal association area, this whole component. And this is a visual association area, and this is visual area. And this is this yellow component is the limbic association area. This is what the summary of the various areas of the brain. So my objective in this lecture was to provide you about the various terms we use and the areas of the brain, so that whenever we talk, we will have a clear visibility of what we are looking at. I have referred these books, the guidance textbook of medical physiology, especially those association areas and other things. Then from the Candles, Neuroscience, the Kenong's Review of Physiology, and from the Sampson Wrights. Okay, so these are some of the questions. I just pose it for you. Just work on them. Draw a neat label diagram of cerebral hemisphere, showing various areas and their broad function. Add a note on various association areas. Okay, so then write short notes on frontal lobe, parietal lobe, limbic area, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, dominant hemisphere, representational hemisphere, hemispheric lateralization, parieto-occipital temporal association area, frontal association area, and the limbic association area. In the next class, I will take up the Brodmann's area of the cerebral cortex and their functions. Okay, thank you.